My grandfather, may he rest in peace, worked in law enforcement from the days of the Soviet Union until the end of the turbulent 1990s. He was an investigator in the only police department in a small town near Moscow. He was a taciturn, sullen man, a real hard nut to crack. But as soon as you started talking about his work, something changed in him. He became a little livelier, as if something long dormant inside him had been awakened. I always felt that his job was his whole life. When I was a teenager, already fascinated by all things mystical and inexplicable, I would often stay up late in his kitchen, asking him about the strangest and most mysterious cases he had encountered. The first case I want to tell you about happened in 1993 and is remarkable in that no one has ever been able to explain it logically. There were two photos accompanying this story, one of the house where it all happened, and the other of the stairwell where the body was found. For the particularly inquisitive, it was the second staircase between the third and fourth floors. It was evening, around 10 o'clock. An investigative team was dispatched to the scene. In our town, such teams were assembled from whoever was available. But according to my grandfather, the investigator and the medical examiner were always at the scene. And this is what they found on the stairs. The body of a man in a pool of blood, his head severed and lying nearby. The edges of the wound were ragged and uncharacteristic. My grandfather said at the time, "It looks like someone gnawed on him. Chewed him, you know." His clothes, sweatpants, a sweater, and slippers were in tatters, torn in a dozen places. Underneath there were multiple wounds, as if someone had tortured him viciously, brutally. The forensic expert immediately noticed that the body was still warm, and rigor mortis had not set in. This meant that less than 2 hours had passed since death, which was later confirmed by the testimony of the victim's wife. The woman lived on the 4th floor in an apartment literally 3 meters from the place where her husband died. She was the one who found him. She was already in a state appropriate for the circumstances. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her tongue was slurring. But this is what they managed to find out. At around 9:30, her husband went out to take out the trash. 15 minutes passed, and she began to worry. Maybe he had wandered off to his drinking buddies, who often sat in the courtyard in the evenings with a bottle. Their windows did not face the courtyard, so she went to check for herself. She opened the door, went out, took just a couple of steps down the stairs. And there it was. Blood, a body, horror. After that, it was impossible to get anything coherent out of her, either that evening or later. But the strangest thing was yet to come. They questioned all the residents of the building, and no one, absolutely no one, had heard anything. No noise, no screams, no commotion, no blows. And in those days, the doors were made of plywood, not iron, and you could hear literally everything. It felt as if at that moment the whole house was plunged into a kind of deaf, sticky silence, as if someone had deliberately turned off the sound. A group of local drinkers were indeed sitting on that very bench by the entrance that evening. According to them, they had settled there around 8 p.m. and during that time had only noticed 2 residents entering the building: an elderly woman from the 1st floor and a single mother with a child from the 2nd floor. Both of them, as was later confirmed, had not heard or seen anything suspicious. And what is especially important, no one left the entrance during that time. The old man immediately suspected a dog. Who else could have mutilated a person like that in the entrance of an ordinary residential building? They checked all the dog owners in the building and found 2. but both of them were small, decorative breeds. None of these dogs could even tear the fabric on a knee, let alone tear someone's throat. A forensic examination later confirmed this. But what was really striking was the description of the injuries. The head had been severed, as if by teeth. The spine at the point of detachment was literally ground to pieces, as if it had been put through a meat grinder. There was a single bite mark on the thigh, and it was too perfect. Every tooth was visible, both upper and lower. It was like something out of a textbook. The expert, a man with years of experience, just shook his head. He had never seen anything like it before. The jaws did indeed resemble those of a dog, but they were much larger. And, pay attention, there were 48 teeth in the bite mark. As we all know, a normal dog has a maximum of 42 teeth, and that's in the rarest of cases. I'll add a couple of personal thoughts as someone who has owned a large dog. Yes, in 15 to 20 minutes, a massive dog is quite capable of chewing through a bone as thick as an arm. But there would be a lot of noise, fuss, wheezing, and groaning. Even if we assume that the creature immediately jumped into the throat and bit through the larynx, which is possible if the jaws were really huge, someone would still have heard something, or at least noticed the beast. It's impossible not to notice a dog the size of a pony wandering aimlessly around the stairwell. But here, complete silence. And another oddity: blood. There was a lot of it, but only around the body. No traces upward, no drops downward. It was as if the body had simply been laid on the floor and then methodically cut up. No rush, no noise. Everything was neat and clean. And yet I myself had witnessed my dog once bite the neck of an aggressive stray boxer. Blood flowed like a river, dripping from his mouth, leaving a wet trail all the way home. And a human being has many times more blood. And here there were no traces of it anywhere except on the body. Not a single drop. So, it turns out that we have something. Something huge, silent, capable of literally tearing an adult man to pieces in a confined space without making a sound, without a single cry. It disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. Mysticism? Madness? Or something better left unknown? How did it all end? It's simple. The case was closed. The verdict: attack by a stray dog. As a preventive measure, a couple of local enthusiasts who caught stray animals were reprimanded and told to do a better job. That's the whole story, or rather, the official version. The winter of '95 was particularly snowy and cold. On one such evening, at around 8 o'clock, an unexpected visitor dropped by the duty station. A priest from a church lost in the very backyards of our town, in places where even buses try not to go. He entered slowly, quietly, reserved, but it was clear that he was shaking inside. He did not come with a sermon, but with a complaint. He was being threatened, he said, constantly. He brought with him a whole pile of notes written on scraps of school notebooks. The letters were clumsy, printed, with a bunch of spelling mistakes. The priest on duty even laughed at it at first, saying, "Who writes like that?" But his laughter was short-lived. These notes all said the same thing. Threats, incoherent phrases, sometimes just repeated words like incantations. According to the priest, the notes began to appear in his mailbox every few days at first, and then every day, without fail. When he finished writing his statement, the officer on duty asked him, as was customary, if he had said everything and if he wanted to add anything. The priest hesitated noticeably, shifted from foot to foot, and then said almost in a whisper, I hear noises in my apartment. It sounds like someone is hitting the linoleum with their palms, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the hallway, very clearly. When asked if he had checked the source of the sound, the priest just shook his head. No. I was praying. I hoped that God would protect me. He looked frightened and depressed, but calm, like a man who had decided that he had probably said goodbye to the world. The officer on duty, of course, wrote everything down, but hardly took it seriously. And there was plenty to do that winter, so no one bothered to look into the paranormal. The report was filed away, along with the notes, and forgotten, until it was too late. A little over a week passed. The investigation team was called to the scene. In the forest, about 200 meters from the road, a body had been found in a small clearing. As you may have guessed, it was the priest. The horror they saw there stuck in the minds of everyone who was there. The body was almost completely stripped of muscle tissue on the arms and legs, as if someone had cut it off to the bone with surgical precision. The skin was covered with blisters, and the face was contorted, as if death had caught him in the moment of a scream. He was identified only by a cross on his chest, his long hair, and his beard. He had no other clothes on. Experts later determined that death had occurred about 7 to 8 days earlier. But here's the strange thing. The body could not have been lying in the forest all that time. It was decomposed in the same way that bodies decompose in a closed, warm room, not in the cold. This was confirmed by the pensioner who called the police. He walked his dog along the same route every day and swears that the body was not there yesterday. And now for the strangest part. There were numerous prints around the body, not just footprints, but handprints, large, white, and distinct, as if someone had moved through the snow with their hands, large human hands. The tracks led from the road itself, along the forest path, but not on it, but across the snowdrifts, parallel to it. At the same time, there were no signs that the body had been dragged or carried. Only these palms. No footprints. The old man, the same pensioner, just shook his head. This isn't even nonsense anymore. It's God knows what. I'm honestly still in shock. The snowfall that had fallen during the night would have covered any old tracks. That meant the body had appeared literally the morning before. It had been carried there by someone or something. The interrogation of the pensioner, interviews with residents of the 2 nearest houses, and the garage cooperative security guards did not clarify anything. The only thing that was confirmed was that the old man, dissatisfied and nosy, had complained more than once about finding animal corpses in that very clearing. Sometimes a cat, sometimes a dog, a rat, a crow. He called the police, filed reports, but to no avail. He had to bury the poor creatures himself. And of course, he shared his thoughts about Satanists. How could he not? The place itself is remote. Even the nearest houses are 600 to 700 meters away. The cooperative is about the same. No one saw any cars nearby, no suspicious people, no ordinary people with backpacks or bags. In a word, it was empty. Then they remembered the notes. They went to take a look. The first one was a couple of lines along the lines of, "Renounce your faith, or we'll kill you." But the ones that had apparently been added later were more interesting. My grandfather even quoted one for posterity. "Take off your cross, or you'll feed the hungry." There were other strange phrases, but unfortunately, he didn't remember them. I admit that at the time, I didn't insist that he revisit old connections and dig into the archives. Now, of course, I regret it. All the notes were written with a bunch of grammatical errors in clumsy, clearly uneducated handwriting. They didn't even bother with handwriting analysis. There was no point. They sent them for fingerprinting and headed to the priest's apartment. The door was unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry on either lock. Remembering the priest's words about slaps with the palm of the hand, we conducted a thorough fingerprinting of the hallway, kitchen, and entire apartment, though without much hope. And then, suddenly, we found several clear prints, not just large, but huge. They could belong to a hammerer or a blacksmith, muttered the old man. The apartment seemed to be in order. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no missing valuables. The icons were in place. There was no one to ask. The priest lived alone, had no relatives, and was an orphan. The fingerprints on the notes and on the floor were the same. But there were no matches in the databases, neither in the local files nor in the regional ones. Nothing. And the autopsy turned everything upside down. The muscles on his arms and legs had not been eaten by animals, as they had first thought, but neatly removed with surgical precision. A scalpel or something similar. There were no other injuries on the body, no signs of poison or other substances. They began to question his parish. It turned out that he had not been seen in church since the day he went to the police. He disappeared either on his way home after evening service or from his apartment, given that the door was open. Neighbors claimed that he most likely did not return home. One old woman said that she came by around 9 in the evening to ask for advice. She rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She did not hear any suspicious noises and did not see anyone in the stairwell. And so, a dead end. They latched onto the idea of large hands and began checking disabled people and former military personnel, especially those living nearby. First and foremost, those who had served in Afghanistan and Chechnya. They combed through almost the entire city. Not a single match. To be honest, they didn't have much hope. In the end, we blamed it all on elusive cult members, just like in an old, similar case. We checked those 2 guys too, by the way. They're locked up tight and won't be out anytime soon. Maybe they're accomplices. But this is a completely different case. That's about it. If they hadn't ignored the priest back then, maybe he would have told us more, and the case would have been solved. But as it is, what we have is what we have. It's not really a criminal case, but something else. And by the way, here's that photo. I took it around 11 at night. The one you saw in the morning was taken the next day when I went out with the dog. Those are the lights I was talking about. Zooming in didn't help. I can show you if you want, but you won't see any details. And the flash hit the trees so hard that even though I'm not easily scared, I turned away. Not because I'm a coward. It's just that this forest, it's oppressive. Especially when you know what was there. The lights were located exactly where that clearing was. They weren't cigarettes. They were too far away, about 200 to 250 meters. Maybe bonfires or motorcycle taillights. But cars can't get through there. The path is narrow, and there's no way to squeeze between the trees. And anyway, it didn't look like that. It happened in the summer of '96. What made this case different from others was that it didn't happen in some remote place or a rough neighborhood, but in a totally normal, pretty safe neighborhood. The same one where I lived, by the way. I learned some of the details long before I heard about the case from my grandfather. The story quickly became the subject of rumors, and part of it reached me firsthand. It was nighttime, around 1 a.m. A man rushed into the station, on the verge of hysterics, with a half-crazed look in his eyes. He was dragging a woman behind him, barefoot, her dress torn, covered in tears. While they were trying to calm the man down, they began to find out what had happened. As it turned out, the situation was as follows. Our hero was a small businessman, 32 years old. He had a couple of stalls at the market and was involved in some business in the area. That evening, some friends came to visit him. His wife, a 27-year-old housewife, was at home with their 8-month-old son. The husband, under the pretext of needing to talk to the guys, asked her to go out for a walk with the child. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. The question of why he would send his wife out of the house with a baby at that hour remained unanswered. Later, various versions of this moment were put forward. One thing is certain. His friends were connected to one of the local organized crime groups. Typical protection. Apparently, the man paid them regularly. His tents remained intact, and he himself was alive and well. But more on that later. A little over an hour later, he finally saw his guests off and began to panic. His wife was still missing. He rushed out into the yard and ran around the house. Silence. In the darkness, he stumbled upon an overturned baby carriage. He simply didn't notice it at first. There was no lighting where it lay, and there still isn't. The nearest street lights were about 30 meters away, closer to the walking path along the forest. So that night, in that corner, you couldn't see a thing. Of course, the boy wasn't in the stroller. That's when the man completely lost it. He started calling for his wife and soon heard sobbing. He rushed toward the sound and found her between the trees, half conscious. She was barely able to walk, swaying and covered in tears. It was impossible to get anything out of her. She responded slowly, as if she didn't quite understand where she was. She didn't remember her name right away. It was obvious that the woman was in shock. My husband put her in the car and drove straight to the police station. My grandfather questioned her there. The result was almost nothing. Realizing that there was little point, he called a doctor. The doctor examined her and found bruises and a couple of abrasions, apparently sustained when she was running through the bushes after someone. Nothing serious. The doctor just advised us to give her a sedative, put her to bed, and leave her alone until morning. He even scolded my grandfather, saying that we had been too quick to interrogate her. Nevertheless, we managed to piece together something from her broken sentences. She was walking along the path behind the house when suddenly something big jumped out from the side of the house, pushed her, snatched the baby from the stroller, and ran toward the iron tower, and then toward the forest. She ran after it as fast as she could. She couldn't catch up. She said something, not he or a person, but something. My grandfather emphasized this. Later, a version about a wild animal appeared, but more on that later. That night, they decided to follow the hot trail. They called in a dog handler with a dog. Maybe they would get lucky. They figured out the iron tower almost immediately. A little over 200 meters from where the stroller was lying, they found a power line tower. It's in the photo. The second tower was further away, and there were warehouses nearby, not in the woods. So everything pointed to the first one. Strange things began when we examined the stroller. The dog, an adult male German shepherd, huge, like a bear. I saw him when I was a child. He was impressive. Began to behave strangely. He growled at the house, tucked his tail between his legs, and didn't listen to commands. The dog handler was shocked. The dog was reliable and experienced, and had never behaved like this before. He was the first to put forward the hypothesis that it might be a large animal, perhaps a moose or, God forbid, a wolf. However, this was an urban area, and no wild animals would ever venture here. But at least it was some kind of explanation. A small tear was found in the fabric of the stroller. At first, no one took it seriously. They said it could have torn when the stroller hit the asphalt, which was covered with glass and sharp gravel. But the grandfather noted this detail. Something about it bothered him. No blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Not in the stroller, not on the ground around it. In the morning, they checked everything again. Same result. The stroller was sent for examination, to no avail. The dog was neither here nor there. They had to drag her to the power line almost by force. Once there, it was the same story. She wasn't searching, she wasn't sniffing, she was acting scared. They let the dog handler go and decided to comb through the nearest section of the forest with flashlights, just to clear their conscience. Of course, they found nothing. In the morning, they called the man whose child had gone missing. He said that his wife was feeling very ill and was taking her to the hospital. Later, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. After she was discharged, she didn't say anything new. It was as if her memory had been wiped. The only clue was the man's friends from that same semi-criminal gang. But, so as not to descend into a banal episode of criminal Russia, I'll say right away, this thread led nowhere. The man himself was a middle-ranking businessman. No ransom was demanded, and no threats were made. It all seemed strange. And later, it became truly frightening. A month later, something similar happened at the same house. Two brothers, aged 10 and 7, were playing behind the house, rummaging under the windows in search of something interesting. The older brother was watching over the younger one at his parents' request. This is how he later told the police. It was around 10 o'clock in the evening. It was already getting dark, and it was time to go home. Then he noticed that his younger brother was standing and looking into a dark niche under the first-floor balcony, possibly one of those in the photo, if the archive is to be believed. He called his brother several times, but he didn't respond. So he went over to him. And then, as if someone had pressed pause, the boy froze. Hairy paws emerged from the darkness of the opening and dragged the little boy inside. Without a sound. No scream, no squeak. How he even saw the fur is another question. There were no lights on. Everything was in semi-darkness. Perhaps his imagination filled in the details. But the boy stood rooted to the spot, staring into the niche. He even thought he saw huge white eyes. Well, he definitely made that part up. Then he broke away and ran home as fast as he could. His father, who was drinking beer after work, didn't believe a word he said. At first, he even hit his son, but he still went to look for his younger son, taking a flashlight with him. He searched all the niches behind the house and found nothing, except for one thing. In the corner of one of the niches, he found a small hole, a small passage leading to the basement. It was too narrow for an adult, but a child could easily squeeze through. The man was determined. He took a crowbar, broke the lock on the basement door, and climbed inside. He searched the entire basement. Empty. The only thing was that it stank of rot. Badly. And also, as my grandfather, who participated in the second search, later said, there was some other strange, heavy smell. but my grandfather didn't notice it. Only that father mentioned it. And here's what's interesting. I knew that kid. We were in the same crowd. He was a little older. And the story he told the police was almost identical to what he told us later. He wasn't a joker or a liar. After that incident, he became withdrawn and stopped going out almost entirely. Most importantly, he was terrified of the back of his house. You couldn't drag him there. On the one hand, I believe him. On the other hand, children can fantasize. But there are the words of the mother, from the first case, even if she was in shock. And the dog, which behaved very strangely, tucking its tail between its legs, growling as if it sensed something abnormal. An animal? Unlikely. What kind of animal steals children without leaving a trace? And the basement entrance is not big enough for a large animal. What about the businessman's friends? But why would they need a second boy? His father had no connection to crime. So the only thing left is something strange. Something that no one saw, but someone felt it.